Ukraine also signed a bilateral security deal with Japan. Meanwhile, Russia has said that the G7 agreement to provide Ukraine with $50 billion in loans by using interest from frozen Russian assets would be criminal. With Labour revealing its manifesto of election promises, Keir Starmer's opposition party is sitting on a large lead in national polling that shows little sign of ebbing halfway through the campaign. As of Thursday, Keir Starmer's party was on 44.1% versus 22.4% for the Conservatives, as per Bloomberg. A day after the fire broke out in an apartment building in Kuwait, the total toll of Indian nationals, the death toll has risen to 45, even as Kuwaiti authorities arrested 2, including an Indian national. Meanwhile, an Indian Air Force aircraft has departed to bring back the mortal remains. It will first land at Kochi Airport. A staggering total of 120 million people are living forcibly displaced by war, violence and persecution. This is what the UN has said, branding the ever-increasing number a terrible indictment on the state of the world. Well, our big focus, with the war in Ukraine well into its third year, far-right parties storming the power centers of Europe and the Middle East in flames, the democratic world urgently needs strong leadership from the G7 this week. But many analysts warn that one can dream on. But Politico says the G7 summit in the southern Italian coast at the moment features arguably the weakest gathering of leaders the group has mustered for years. Most of the attendees are distracted by elections or domestic crises, disillusioned by years in office, or Politico says they are clinging desperately to power. But the G7 has agreed to use frozen Russian assets to raise $50 billion for Ukraine to help it fight invading Russian forces. Meanwhile, our Prime Minister has a packed schedule at the G7 summit. This is India's 11th participation at the summit. But Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Joe Biden, they have signed a 10-year bilateral security deal between the United States and Ukraine, which Kiev has hailed as historic. Here are the key takeaways so far.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi arriving in the Apulia region of southern Italy. His first international visit since NDTV came to power. He is a special invitee at the G7 meeting, a gathering of the most powerful leaders in the planet. It's going to be a brief visit. Mr. Modi is here for just one day, an aspect reflected perhaps in the size of his interaction with the diaspora here. Unlike massive events in stadiums, there was a 5-minute meet and greet.
I'm in Bari, a full 50 kilometers away from Borgo Egnazia. That is where the all-important summit of the G7 is taking place. The reason we've been unable to go over there is because that entire area is off limits for the media. It's been turned into an absolute fortress. But behind that fortress are important conversations which are taking place, not least of all, on the future of Ukraine.
The US President Joe Biden landing in Italy. His key agenda ahead of a World Peace Summit on Ukraine being held in Switzerland is clear. Arrive at an agreement that sends Russia a strong signal. A $50 billion package to Kiev, financed through seized Russian assets.
We want to demonstrate that the U.S. supports the people of Ukraine, that we stand with them, and that we'll continue to help address their security needs. The agreement will show our resolve and continued commitment.
It's unclear at this stage if Prime Minister Modi will be drawn into the conversation on Ukraine, and it remains unlikely that he'll attend the Ukraine Peace Summit, though India will be well represented. Here in Italy, though, India does have a key role to play. As a leader of the global south, India has been invited to the G7 repeatedly. It's the 11th time India is participating in the meet, whose key players represent close to 45% of the global GDP and more than 10% of the world's population. Significantly, China is not a member, and Russia was ejected in 2014 following their invasion of Crimea in Ukraine.
While the initial agenda of the G7 was on economic issues, talks between the most powerful economies in the world, the overall agenda has changed over a period of time, and that's because the state of the world's economy has changed. For example, India is now the world's 5th largest economy. We are in fact larger as an economy than the host nation Italy, France and also Canada. And India is seen to be an important voice of the global south, which is why India's participation, representation over here is seen to be crucial.
Besides key bilateral meetings, including the possibility of one with his Canadian counterpart Justin Trudeau at a time of great tension between India and Canada over Khalistani separatism, Mr. Modi will be focusing on the Indo-Pacific region, Africa, climate change, migration and artificial intelligence. He will of course also look at the relationship with Italy, a key partner nation with whom New Delhi has had excellent relations. The Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni was in India for the G20 summit in October 2021 and was in India on a state visit in March last year. Both countries are developing their strategic partnership. There are 2 lakh people of Indian origin in Italy, the second highest in the EU after the Netherlands. Italy is a member of the India-led International Solar Alliance. Trade in 2022-2023 was $15 billion. Italy is India's 4th largest partner in the European Union. India has an investment of $400 million in Italy in pharma, IT, electronics manufacturing and engineering.
The G7 is an important platform because it has as members the most important and industrialized countries in the world and some of our key global partners. And for the Prime Minister, it's an occasion to reiterate the importance we attach to multilateralism. It's a platform on which he will espouse his vision of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam and also follow up on some of the outcomes of the G20 summit that he had chaired last year. And obviously, we are also voicing the aspirations and expectations of the global south on this platform.
There's also a profound historic association in the relationship that's often forgotten. Close to 50,000 Indian soldiers fought for the liberation of Italy during the Second World War. They fought in some of the most important battles here, in Florence, Bologna and Monte Cassino. In parts of Italy, Indian soldiers are still remembered and honored.
The Prime Minister's visit to Italy at this time, within days of being sworn in for a record 3rd time as Prime Minister, sets the stage for his foreign policy agenda. India, as we've been repeatedly saying, is an important voice of the global south. We've had an outstanding G20 as well. Over here, there is an impetus being added to the India story, important conversations. Remember, India is also essentially non-aligned. That word is no longer as fashionable perhaps as it once was, but India is not associated with any one power bloc, which in a sense adds to the respect that India earns around the world as an even player, an equal player, which deals with the major powers in an equal way. With camera person Rakesh Singh, Vishnu Shom in Bari for NDTV.
Well, with that, let's turn our attention now to the United Kingdom. Well, imagine having a poll lead so vast, your manifesto can boast £2.5 billion in spare tax rises that you haven't spent. Well, that was Keir Starmer's gambit, his closest thing to surprise the rabbits he detests, as Labour's leader launched an offer to British voters that he hopes won't upset his 23-point poll lead over the Tories. With Labour out of power for 14 years, the party has spent years working up to its policy offer in a grinding internal bureaucracy. As a result, the 136-page manifesto is packed with policy. Here are the details. As the UK polls race inches closer to its final showdown, the Labour Party released its election manifesto with a promise to rebuild the country, ending what party leader Keir Starmer called an era of gestures and gimmicks.
This changed Labour Party has a plan for growth. We are pro-business and pro-worker, the party of wealth creation. We will reform the planning rules, a choice ignored for 14 years, and build the homes and infrastructure you need. We will level up your rights at work, a choice ignored for 14 years, and raise your wages and your security.
From wealth creation for the working class New Border and Security Command to pledging to recognizing Palestine as a state, the manifesto has it all. Central to Labour's pitch is wealth creation through increased investment to help improve the living standards of working people. Labour has also unveiled plans to hike taxes by £8.6 billion through raids on private schools, overseas property investors to pay more for NHS appointments and more. Doing away with Tories' Rwanda scheme, Labour aims to build a new border and security command to stop smuggling of all illegal migrants. Unlike the Conservative Party, Labour's biggest spending commitment is the £23.7 billion for green measures. That is because green policies are at the heart of the party's plans for growth and prosperity as well as climate. Lastly, Keir Starmer has also pledged to reduce wait times at the doctors by creating an extra 40,000 appointments a year by introducing more weekend services. With many big-ticket reforms on its manifesto, Labour is all set to take on the Conservatives at the UK polls on the 4th of July. With Disha Bagchi, Parmeshwar Bava for NDTV.
Two manifestos this week, and there's a clear choice at this election. We published a manifesto that's going to cut taxes for people in this country, and the Labour manifesto that was published today made it clear that taxes are going to rise. Multiple independent sources demonstrate that the tax burden under Labour will rise to the highest levels in history. And in contrast, if I'm re-elected, we will cut taxes for people at every stage of their life, cutting taxes for people in work, cutting tax for people who are self-employed, cutting tax for people who are buying their first home, cutting tax for pensioners and cutting taxes for families. That's the type of country I want to believe.
Well, for further clarity from Ground Zero, we have with us former BBC editor Nicholas Nugent. Thanks so much, Nick, for joining us. Now that both the major parties in the UK have set out their manifestos ahead of the general election, talk to us about how the two manifestos and their promises stack up.
Well, one of the noticeable things about this election is that the key differences, as you put it, have diminished, because Labour, which used to be the party of high spending on welfare, is now preaching the same philosophy as the Conservatives about growing the economy. In other words, it's adopting the philosophy that you can't spend more on health or welfare or education unless your economy is expanding and there is more scope for bringing in revenue.
But Nick, Labour has unveiled £8.6 million of tax rises by 2028-2029, with raids on private schools, overseas property investors and non-doms. The manifesto reiterates Labour's promise not to raise national insurance, income tax or VAT, but the Conservatives, meanwhile, have offered a variety of tax cuts. Which plan does the British public seem to lean towards as things stand today?
Well, yes, but they have ruled out raising all the key taxes. That's to say income tax, national insurance, VAT. Those are the key taxes that affect everybody. So Labour Party reckon they're going to raise their tax by selective measures, raising VAT on private schooling. So that's a vote for equalisation within society, not giving the same privilege to those who can afford expensive schools. And secondly, to tax the oil and gas industry, because once again, that brings in a lot of revenue, but it also helps the climate change policy of reducing dependence on oil and gas, and various other sort of small tax changes, or indeed trying to prevent tax evasion, trying to tighten the rules. So no government is going to win, or no party is going to win this election by putting up what we normally think of as personal taxes, the taxes that affect most people. So they have to find other ways of doing it, other ways of raising the revenue that they're going to need if they are going to succeed in, for example, reducing the waiting lists in the National Health Service, which is something that both parties have put high up in their priorities.
Well, as we wrap, Nick, Nigel Farage's return. Is it turbulence for the Tories? As per the latest numbers, Reform UK has overtaken the Conservatives in a YouGov poll for the first time.
The only significance of reform is how much they damage the Conservative Party, because they're not going to take votes from anyone except the Conservative Party. It's very unlikely they'd take votes from anyone else. So the Conservative Party, already in a difficult condition, will have its number of seats reduced by the performance of Reform. Reform may not get many members of Parliament, a handful at the most, possibly not even that, but they will, in our first past the post system, take away votes from the Conservatives. And the Conservatives know this. So that's why yesterday they started talking, trying to worry their traditional voters and say, if you vote for Reform, that's a vote for the Labour Party, and you could put the Labour Party in power for 10 years. So they are reacting to this, quite honestly, very real threat to the numbers of MPs elected for the Conservative Party by introducing an element of fear that it'll put Labour Party, the traditional socialists, I might say, into power for many years. But I don't see the Labour Party as being very socialist at all these days, because they want to grow the economy more than anything.
Well, it's always a pleasure to chat with you, Nick. Thanks so much for making time for us on the World 24/7. Also joining us on the World 24/7, former Conservative Minister Lord Joe Johnson of Marylebone. Mr. Johnson has been a prominent figure in government policy making, serving as head of Number 10's policy unit and as Minister of State. He is also the younger brother of the former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Thanks so much, Joe, for making time for us. New research from pollsters Public First contains the extraordinary finding that 46% of the public, including 24% of Conservative voters in 2019, they agree that Conservatives deserve to lose every seat they have at the election. What are the chances of Tories returning to power given a series of recent polling data?
No, the overwhelming likelihood is of a change of government, and that's not surprising after 14 years of Conservative or Conservative in coalition government. The country is quite clearly looking for a change. Keir Starmer and the Labour Party are doing a pretty good job at presenting an unthreatening picture of what a Labour Party would mean for the country.
Well, you know, for many in India and for Indian students studying in the UK, there are valid concerns regarding the retention of the graduate route visa scheme. I noticed that the Conservative Party manifesto has no explicit mention of it, but when I spoke to the Shadow Trade Secretary, he clearly said Labour has no plans to abolish it. Help us understand where things stand at the moment.
The Conservatives didn't indicate any intention that they would remove the graduate route were they to be returned to office after July the 4th. Clearly, there's a low likelihood of that happening anyway, but it's good to see that they didn't indicate any intention to clamp down on international students from India or any others intending to use the graduate route, which, as you know, enables students to stay after they graduate for 2 years to work or look for work in the UK.
Well, thank you so much, Lord Joe Johnson, for joining us with that quick update exclusively on the World 24/7. Welcome back. A special IAF aircraft carrying mortal remains of 45 Indian victims in the fire incident in Kuwait has taken off for Kochi. The Minister of State for the Ministry of External Affairs, Kirti Vardhan Singh, who coordinated with the Kuwaiti authorities ensuring swift repatriation, is on board the aircraft. Now, that flight is expected to land in Kochi around 11 a.m. our time. But among the victims, unfortunately, around 24 were from Kerala, while the rest were from Tamil Nadu, Bihar and Uttar Pradesh. As we had extensively covered, due to the devastation, many of the bodies were charred beyond recognition, which meant that they had to actually be identified through DNA tests. My colleague Sam Daniels tracking all the latest updates for us. He joins us live from Chennai at the moment. Sam, an Indian Air Force aircraft has departed to bring back the mortal remains. Can you guide us when it's expected to land at Kochi airport? Right, we seem to have lost that line with my colleague Sam Daniel. As we work on regaining that line, I'd just like to point out that many have highlighted that this tragic incident shows the appalling conditions in which Indian workers are living in the Middle East. But as we can share with you, an IAF aircraft has departed to bring back the mortal remains, and it's expected to land in Kochi. We are waiting to get in touch with my colleague Sam Daniel with the latest update. But at the moment, the details that we can disclose are that the flight is expected to land in Kochi around 11 a.m. local time. And among the victims, around 24 Indians were from Kerala, while the rest were from Tamil Nadu, Bihar and Uttar Pradesh. As we had reported, that due to the devastation, many of the bodies were charred beyond recognition, which meant that they had to be identified through DNA tests. Sam is with us at the moment. Sam, what time is that aircraft expected to land at Kochi airport exactly?
Parameshwar, we expect the special flight from Kuwait to land in Cochin at 11 this morning. And both the Kerala and Tamil Nadu governments have made arrangements for vehicles to take or hand over these mortal remains to families both in these two states. Already the Tamil Nadu Minister in charge of non-resident Tamils is heading to Kochi. The Kerala Chief Minister also has instructed the NOCRA, the body that's coordinating this, to make sure all the mortal remains will reach the families soonest. The Kerala government has announced a total relief of 5 lakh to each of these families, besides another assistance by other parties amounting to 12 lakh rupees. In the case of Tamil Nadu, it's 7 lakh. And this also raises the larger question of safety of migrant workers from India, particularly in the Gulf region after this Kuwait tragedy. And the bodies were completely charred. It took DNA tests for identification. Now authorities confirm that all the mortal remains have been identified now, and there will be no delay in terms of any other procedure after they land in Cochin.
Right. As always, Sam, thanks so much for joining us with the latest update. We also have with us for a quick comment, President of the Kuwait chapter of the Kerala Muslim Culture Centre, Sharafuddin Kaneth. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us with a brief update. We are aware that the building was rented by a construction firm, NDTV Group, and it housed 195 workers. But were there any glaring health and safety concerns in this building that have come to light yet?
First of all, myself, Sharafuddin Kaneth, I'm ex-president of Kuwait KMCC and ex-director. Okay. And I was there in the building immediately after the fire. We all reached there. And the building security measures only as per Kuwait municipality rules. They should not close the ground floor completely. Unfortunately, it has been closed, and there was less opportunity to escape considering other buildings, and the pillars should be remain. Should not close completely surroundings of the ground floor. Because so that is the reason government of Kuwait, immediately after this incident, they arrested municipality head of the superintendents and authorities because the security measures means they should adhere with the rules and regulations of the municipality, so that has not been taken care. That is the reason mainly they are saying the death toll go high due to the, this is the, there was
we
no
know that
room
the Kuwaiti
to escape.
authorities are investigating this in great detail. Thank you so much, sir. We will, of course, be in touch with you for the latest updates from Ground Zero. Meanwhile, thank you for investing your time in watching this edition of The World 24/7. Latest updates continue. Do stay tuned.